Hello, in this lecture we're going to continue our discussion of production and cost analysis, chapter 11. Chapter goals, remember, are to explain the role of the firm in economic analysis, describe the production process in the short run, calculate fixed cost, variable cost, marginal cost, total cost, average fixed cost, average variable cost, and average total cost. We will continue on this portion at this time. Distinguish the various cost curves and describe the relationship among them. Alright, so last time we've defined these terms, we looked at the calculation. We are now going to put this into a nice table here, this nice Excel sheet. Now I know that's going to be a bit intimidating just to look at all these numbers and look at all these references and try to memorize what this all means. But if we looked at it line by line, it's really not that bad. So if you take it piece by piece and just analyze it piece by piece here, then analyze it piece by piece when we graph these things, then it will start to make sense. So if you take it one by one, it does start to come together. So bear with me as we break down this a bit. We're going to say that output, that's how many units we produce. So if we're making guitars, that's how many guitars we're making. So here's the output 3. Fixed costs. Fixed costs are things that do not change with the level of production. You'll notice the fixed cost is 50 all the way down, like the rent. The rent doesn't change. In the short run, it is fixed. And then we have the variable costs. Variable costs are things that do change in relation to the number of units we produce. Now, in this case, in real life, of course, the fixed cost will not be exact. I mean, the variable costs will not be exact in terms that they may not change exactly with the number of output in the actual variable cost. But in theory, of course, that's the idea, meaning things like inputs of wood, things like the payment for workers on hourly wages will change in relation to the number of units we produce. Then we have the total cost. Total cost, remember, all we're doing is taking the total cost and breaking it out into two components, those components being fixed and variable. So the total cost will be the 50 fixed cost plus the variable cost of 38. That gives us the 88. We're not going to have a marginal cost yet because we're starting off at 3. We're not going to compare it to the 0. In this case, we'll compare it on the next row. And then we have the average fixed cost. So the average fixed cost is going to be the fixed cost of 50 divided by the 3. So fixed cost of 50 divided by 3, we're taking like the rent, the fixed cost divided by the number of outputs, like the number of guitars. We get an average of 1667 of fixed cost per unit, per guitar. Average variable cost, we're going to take the variable cost, 38, divided by 3. So the average variable cost per unit, 1266 in this case. And then the average total cost. We can do this two ways. We can take the total cost, 88, divided by the number of units, 3, and we would come up with the 2933. Or we can say total cost is the components of fixed cost and variable cost. Average total cost, therefore, is the average fixed cost plus the average variable cost. All right, let's go through a couple more rows and do this. If we go to the next row, we make one more unit of guitars. We now make 4 guitars rather than the 3 guitars we made last time. We still have the fixed cost of 50. That's the rent, doesn't change no matter how many guitars we make. And we know that the variable cost, in this case, is going to be 50. Okay, so the variable cost being the things that change with production, fixed cost being things like the rent. And if we take a look at the total cost, that's going to be the 50 plus the 50, that is 100. Now we can look at what happens on the margin. This is really what we're thinking. Should we go from 3 units to 4 units? How do we make the decision? On the margin. So this is really important to us to think about what will happen in the next decision, how to calculate this. 100 total cost minus the 88 divided by the change in units, which is just 1 in this case, 4 minus 3. Therefore, we have the 12. So that's the marginal cost. And then we're going to talk about the average fixed cost. So the average fixed cost, we're going to take the fixed costs divided by 4. We're making 4 units now. And you'll notice what happens to the average fixed cost. It goes down as we produce more things. Because remember, the fixed cost is constant. If we're saying that the rent is $50, then the rent stays constant as we produce more things. Therefore, the rent divided by the number of units we're producing will go down. So the variable cost, on the other hand, is more stable. And notice it's not exactly stable because it's not a perfect world. However, it should be less maneuverable. It should not always go down because when we think about things like the number of hours that we're going to have to pay for per guitar in terms of hourly wages, as well as things like material, wood, and whatnot, it should go up at a constant rate. And you'll note if you look at the two here, they're somewhat constant. Sometimes they actually go up. So it went from here, we make more units, it goes up. So it's going to be somewhat constant, not perfect. If we think about actual units in theory, where we would use kind of constant units. So then we're going to talk about the average total cost. Average total cost then could be the total cost divided by the number of units, or it could be the average fixed cost plus the average variable cost. Now we're gonna not go and calculate 5, 6, 7, and 8. We're just gonna jump to 9 and 10 and do a similar calculation down here. So if we took a look at 9 units of output, the variable cost would still be 50. It doesn't, it's always 50 because it's the rent. It doesn't change no matter how many units we make. And the variable costs now are 10. So, 100 variable cost units, and that means the total cost is the 50 plus the 100, 150. Now, notice we're not calculating the marginal rate here. Where we could take the 150 minus the 100 divided by the 9 over the 4, but we're not doing it in this table. We're just going to compare the marginal cost in relation to a change of 1 unit. So we're kind of jumping up on the curve, and we're going to do the analysis when we look at the next one. We know that the average fixed cost has gone down dramatically now, which makes sense because we're making a few more units. And we know that the fixed cost is constant of 50, that's like the rent, and now we're making 9 units. So we are using our facilities, if we're thinking of the rent, more efficiently because we're making more units for that $50 we have to pay for the rent. So there's the 56, it went down substantially. The average variable cost also went down, and that's going to be the variable cost divided by the 9. But remember, this one it will fluctuate, but it should stay somewhat stable. It should stay a little bit more stable over the time frames. Then we got the average total cost, which of course will be the average cost. It'll be the total average total. It'll be the total cost divided by the number of units, or it'll be the average fixed cost plus the average variable cost. All right, so let's do this one more time. We're going to do this one more time. Now we're going to make an output of 9 units, or 10 units. We're making 10 guitars. What's the fixed cost going to be? The same fixed cost, because it's like the rent. It doesn't change. Then we got the variable cost at 108 in this case. Total cost, 50 plus the 108 is 158. Now we're going to calculate the margin. What happened on the margin to our costs, meaning what happened to marginal cost, MC, would be that we have the 158 minus the 150 is 8 divided by 1, the change of 10 over 9. Therefore, we have 8 marginal cost. If we look at the average fixed cost, we are now going to take the fixed cost of 50 divided by 10 units. So of course it went down. That's what we would expect. And we take the average variable cost, that's going to be the variable cost divided by the output. And it went down too, but note that it doesn't always go down here. When we get down to more production, it'll actually go up. And we'll talk a little bit more about, the shape of the curve a bit. But for now, just remember that the fixed cost, the variable cost should change in relation to production. The fixed cost will definitely go down per increase in unit of production. The fixed cost per unit will go down as we produce more units. The average variable cost should be more constant. And then we've got the average total cost, which of course would be total cost divided by output, or the average fixed cost plus the average variable cost. So I'll let you do that through the rest of the table, and that'll be a good time for you to put that through and look at the rest of that. Let's move on to graphing this nice looking thing here. So first one, if we take a look at the fixed cost, we just graphed the fixed cost. Notice we got total cost up here on the Y, quantity down here. And no matter how many units we make, we can make 1 unit, we can make 32 units, and we still have to pay the rent, being my example of fixed cost, and it is $50. So it doesn't matter how many units we make, we're going to pay $50 for the rent. So then if we think of variable costs are those things that change along with production. So if we don't make anything, we don't have a variable cost. We're down here basically at 0, because if we don't make anything, we don't have to pay for people's hourly wages. We don't have to pay for wood for the guitars. We don't have to pay for anything. But if we go up, it goes up in somewhat of a relation. Now we have this curve here. It's a bit of a curve, and we'll talk more about the curve in a bit. Notice it does eventually curve up towards the end, and that of course is the law of basically diminishing returns, meaning that sometimes at some point we're going to get a diminishing return, meaning at one more unit of production, it's going to cost us more than the last unit of production, is the theory. And then, of course, if we look at the total cost curve, what does total cost consist of? It consists of the fixed cost plus the variable cost. So that means if we start at 0 units, we had a fixed cost of 50, and we have the variable cost of 0. If we add those two up, we start at 50. So that means if we produced no units, we wouldn't have any variable costs, but we still have to pay the rent. And then you'll note that from that point, the rent's going to be the same, and the variable costs will then go up at the same rate of the variable costs down here. So we have a line that starts at the fixed cost of 50, and then it's parallel to the line at any given point of the variable cost when we're taking a look at the total cost. So take a look at it. This one does make sense to take a look at that and just think of these lines here and be able to look at this graph and say, yeah, this makes sense. If I was to look at this graph and we didn't have any labels on it, we didn't give you these labels, you should be able to say, okay, yeah, this one would be fixed cost because it doesn't change as production goes up. This one would be variable cost. Why? Because, well, it starts at 0, and that means that at no production, we don't have to pay any variable costs. And this one then must be the total cost because it looks just like variable cost. However, it starts at the fixed cost portion of the rent, $50. Okay, graphing per unit output cost curves. All right, so if we looked at the average fixed cost, remember what we said when we said the average fixed cost? Look what we have here. We have the cost, and then we have the quantity, and now we're graphing the average fixed cost. This one's a lot more confusing for a lot of people because it's kind of strange to graph the average when you first start doing it. But note what we're saying is that the average, meaning the total the total cost divided by the output. That's what we're graphing. And it goes down, of course, because we're saying the rent is 50. And if we produce 1 unit, we're saying that 1 unit costs 50. And then as we produce more units, we're saying the cost per unit, the average fixed cost, will go down. So notice that the cost per unit, the average fixed cost, actually goes down as we produce more units. And the reason we have to break out the fixed cost from the variable cost is because that's a really different behavior than when we think about the average variable cost and average total cost, which will have typically this U-shaped line and will veer up once we hit the bottom point. And the bottom point will always be in alignment with the marginal cost. So to think about that, remember we're talking about the average. The marginal cost means the cost of the next unit of production. That's what's happening on the margin as of the next decision. So if you think about that, then if we're thinking about something like if we compare this to our cumulative GPA or something like that, and we say it's a 3.0 or whatever, as long as the marginal cost or the next cost is below the average, meaning our next grade is below the 3.0, that means that our average total cost will always be decreasing. Our average total cost is decreasing as long as the marginal cost, the next grade, the next unit, is below the current average, as it is here. And then, of course, at some point in time, if the marginal cost is greater than the average, whether we're talking about the average total cost or the average variable cost, then it will bring up the average. So now the average is going up. Now the marginal cost, the cost at the margin, is higher. That means we have the bow shape of the average going up. That's going to be true for both the average total cost and the average variable cost. So the marginal cost is going to intersect the average total cost and the average variable cost at the bottom, the trough of the U-shaped curve.